Okay, so do you guys like Sex in the City?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite character? Sarah Jessica Parker, obviously.
I didn't even watch Sex and the City.
Sex and the City was an earth-shaking show at the time of its debut in 1998. It celebrated New York City as a character, told women's stories in assertive ways, and put HBO the network on the map. We all know this now because the series proved to be historic. Sex in the City was fun, feminist, and flawed. And now, as we anticipate the arrival of its reboot, we might be curious to consider, how did Sex in the City set the cultural stage for the Kardashians? Jennifer Keishin Armstrong, author of Sex in the City and Us, is a historian and writer for the pop culture literate. A former reporter for Entertainment Weekly, she's authored several big hit books about TV. In Sex in the City and Us, Armstrong's deep dive into the history of the show, her many interviews with its creators and stars, and her expert analysis of the show's impact all roll into an incredibly informative and incisive read. As it turns out, Kim K can be connected to the iconic Carrie character in more ways than you might even expect.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. Okay, wait, no, I want to do that again. Why did I say yay? I can't, I don't want to be a yay person. Yay, baby! So, you're a writer and researcher about pop culture and history, and you've also been an amazing mentor to me in my dream of being a writer about this stuff, which thank you.
You're welcome. I'm happy to help. It's always crazy out there.
Can you tell us a little bit about just your interest in pop culture and your work?
So I've written 7 books about sort of pop culture history in one way or another. Yes. And mostly television is my thing. And that really all came out of a lifelong interest in and love of TV and pop culture, but I also was on staff at Entertainment Weekly for 10 years where I covered mostly television. And that was really where I started to kind of like find my niche. Just did a lot of work on women in television and comedy in particular, but also just social issues on television and the ways that TV reflects the issues that we're dealing with right now.
You wrote a great book about Sex in the City. What was going on culturally when Sex in the City hit the scene?
Sometimes I feel like I have to explain this more than if I was like, oh, this takes place in the 1850s. Do you know what I mean? Like, things were so different, and a huge part of that is what they did to change things, of course. But I like to explain to the kids, women were not acting this way on television before this. Yeah. And it's super important. And they switched a light in this case. It was like this show came on and we all started going to brunch and talking about sex immediately. They changed so many things, but the biggest thing that I think they changed was really just the depiction of women on television. And specifically, we had never heard women talk about sex.
It created a culture around brunch. It was generative of sort of like the city and the way people were interacting with it, maybe even.
People literally moved to New York City because of Sex in the City.
Wow, yes.
I know everybody's always been chasing their dreams here,
yeah.
But I think young women in particular felt suddenly like, oh, I could go there and I could be me, I could be independent is the big thing. I think, showing women who were more dependent on each other than on a man was really, really key to this whole picture.
Yes, like that iconic scene when they're like, maybe we're each other's soulmates.
There's this huge current of romance in the show that's, it's called Sex in the City. It was like what they were talking about, but they were with each other.
Yeah.
That to me is also hugely important in its legacy.
Women coming to the city, independent women, women supporting each other, and also women in their 30s. Mm-hmm. And there still is this like idealization and fetishization of youth. And I do think it kind of showed that there's not a deadline for getting your dreams, accomplished.
This was a huge deal. This is another thing that I think seems a little weird to us, even though we do still love youth. It was really not done then that like women in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And Samantha, the character, is, you know, a little bit older than the others. And the fact that she's the sexiest one and she was like 40-ish when it started, that was also really, really big. This show did so much so quickly that we forget and we just kind of love to dismiss it and be like, oh, that's a dumb show about dumb ladies with shoes.
Yeah.
And it did just an astronomical amount for the way that we think about women in media and thus in our own lives.
Media pervades us. It's
Yeah.
like, that McLuhan quote where it's like the fish doesn't know it's in water. And that's
Right.
how we are with media.
And especially shows like this, and even the Kardashians, I would say too, which
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get to, but like these are the kinds of things that end up permeating. Not every single show does this, but the way that then it makes us go to brunch, it affects the way we shop when we go shopping. It made us all go get cupcakes. I mean, that's so strange, but like there was one episode in which they ate Magnolia cupcakes for a minute or so on screen, and it made the cupcake craze happen.
Literally.
It made Magnolia into an international brand. I literally interviewed the guy who bought Magnolia and expanded it, and he said like the reason I bought it was because of Sex and the City.
Oh my gosh.
I remember that scene, by the way.
Yes. How do we all remember that?
There was a whole like war between the two women who had originally started Magnolia Cupcakes because like one wanted to take it big and one wanted to be like, no, I'm still, let's just stay this little tiny, you know, independent place. And it was almost impossible because it got to a point where there were lines around the block. They had to get a bouncer at one point because it was so busy. So it spawned this like huge effect. There's like a whole economy that Sex and the City basically started with that and the Manolos.
Yes.
And just fashion in general. It did a ton for fashion.
Well, and the Kardashians do this too. Daring fashion that everyday people can try.
That's right. You know, you have to remember the TV landscape at this time too, that like this put HBO on the map.
Yeah.
We didn't even have cable. Cable was like a new idea for us, that we would watch television shows on cable was new. So we really just had a few options that were national shows. This brought edgy fashion, daring fashion to the whole country. Suddenly you could have Manolos being sold in the Midwest, which was just not true before because of the stuff just didn't reach. It's nothing against the Midwest. It just didn't reach places. My sister, who is a costumer for a living now, she was still pretty young when the show was on, and she would sneak downstairs to watch it, not because of the sex, she didn't care about the sex, but because of the fashion. Because we grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and she was like, the only way I could find out what was super cutting edge in fashion was either Vogue magazine or Sex and the City. Now we have the internet. You have to remember so much of what this show is doing is essentially what the internet takes over, whether it's being open about sex, like we can find the information we want now about sex without being embarrassed. And similarly, we can find fashion, but that was not true then. When they did the first season in particular, I have all these funny stories from them about like how they would go scout places and they were like, no, screw you, you can't film here. Like, and then by the third and fourth season, people are begging to have their establishment on the show because people would literally start to go to a place, you know, Sushi Samba becomes a thing because they went there for 3 seconds once on a date or something. I do think a huge part is just like, can we film here? Does this look good? Different than like the fashion, of course, which was very, very deliberate. Patricia Field did the fashion. And put tons and tons of thought into that.
What's so crazy is like, I'm not a huge Sex and the City stan, but I've absorbed all of it. There's episodes that are comfort episodes still, and I know who did I know the name Patricia Fields.
One could make a Sex and the City reference being confident enough that everyone's gonna understand it. It's actually when somebody doesn't, you're like, you haven't seen Sex and the City?
I don't think I've ever really met someone where I've had that moment.
I mean, that's what always is like the sort of key to knowing how iconic something is, of course, is that you can make a reference to someone who's never seen it and they kind of know. I think of like my dad, at least me saying Sex and the City. I think he'd probably even get like shoes and Sex and the City on a basic level. Like he knows what that is. I mean, in some ways it's a detriment because similar to the Kardashians, I think it can become a cartoon of itself. It's why people don't take it seriously to some extent. I cannot tell you how many people say to me like, it's actually really good, I just watched it. I'm like, I know, I wrote a whole book about it. But especially, unfortunately, with things that have to do with women, even more so if they are generally overall pleasant to watch. People tend to start be like, ugh, it's not The Sopranos.
Right.
It's not men killing each other, so it's probably not that important. But I always like to remind people that Sex and the City came 6 months before The Sopranos on HBO, so they put them on the map
revitalized
before
HBO, yeah.
Sopranos, and people often forget about that. And I think both did similar things, weirdly enough, even though they look extremely different. They both had these huge contributions to our culture. This is another thing that's like crazy and you have to go back in the time machine, but like HBO wasn't a thing. People weren't watching TV on HBO.
Wow.
It was home box office. People would watch like boxing. This was part of a new strategy. It's so hilarious to think at the time that they were like, let's try this crazy idea where we like have original television shows on our cable network. And they have to be so good that people will want to pay for HBO. And these were the two big attempts. Even when people were signing on for both of these shows, you have to understand, so many of the stars said to me, like, I was like, what? They were like, this is a show, but it's going to be on HBO. And they were like, why would I want to do that?
Because I bet that kind of conversation's happening now with stars and streaming services. Yeah.
But they really didn't expect like the tons of people would watch and to have the cultural impact that they had. Their idea was also like, we're HBO, we're home box office, so let's make shows that are like movies. That means these shows have to be so good.
Yes.
That everyone's talking about them. This is also very much like what we're used to with streaming now. The other big part of those equations is what can we do that the networks can't?
Yeah.
Sex and violence.
Oh, wow.
So Sex and the City is your sex and Sopranos is your violence.
And I'm still thinking about how HBO like fully predated and like predicted or like paved the way for streaming services.
It's completely the same model on all fronts. Like it's 10 episodes, subscription, but it does make it way more important that you have a buzzy show and also like a brand. So I love thinking about like, what's the show that got you to start coughing up for whatever streaming service, right? But like Orange is the New Black was that for a lot of people.
I think it was for Netflix, yes.
That revolutionized binge watching. It was the first show to ever do that.
That created binge watching because that was Netflix does the all at once. That was different from HBO. That was a new moment of like, oh, they're going to give us a full season and I'm going to watch this thing in one weekend and be a crazy person. There's all of these technologies really we don't realize how much they change our experience of any given show.
Of the show and how we think and how we create. I can actually pull and respect and appreciate and sort of see the narrative structure of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I think it's a really meticulously structured show is what I always say. But with Sex and the City, it has that classic narrative form too, but there's a formula or something that they've mastered that's quick, but somehow still deep and balances everybody. That's what makes it so good and so bingeable.
I was astounded in later seasons to see the amount that they would get into. It's still a half-hour show, essentially. They all have storylines, and they all usually work at least thematically. It's really complicated. That's the real power of the show too. It's like the surprise. I think the reason people whisper to me like, it's really good, is like its emotional impact, especially in those later seasons, the power that it had to just like stab you in the heart. And also just New York City, as we were talking about. This was one of the first shows to shoot on location in New York City for real.
Oh, wow.
Most shows really had to be in LA before that, and HBO opened that up. That was part of what I think made people want to move here because of the show, because they literally saw the actual places.
When I was dreaming of moving to New York, I never got into Real Housewives, but I would watch Real Housewives of New York, which I don't even remember the experience of watching it, besides looking beyond them to see New York in the background. So the point you're making about it being filmed on location in New York, this is kind of a separate thought, but it gets into that real versus stage thing that I love about the Kardashians, of the realness of New York kind of comes through somehow.
It probably created a culture of people dying to see where they were shooting in the city too. So it's like that conversation between the real landscape of the city, and the real people of the city, and then the stories happening within them.
You have to also remember 2000s. This is prime paparazzi time and tabloid time. They would start doing crazy stuff like alternate storylines that weren't real, just to throw off the public. No one except the inner circle knew which scenes were real and which were fake. So there was this whole conversation. Now that they're doing the reboot, it is my impression that they are like almost actively courting it. They have an Instagram that's the costume department from the show, it just has an Instagram where they were posting.
Yeah.
I think they just decided to go ahead and get ahead of it because they knew it would get out anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, let's control the narrative.
just-
Kris Jenner style, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah. I remember conversations of, wait, was that a real thing or a baited thing? Because I think eventually it became like a speculation of, oh, I think they're faking this out sometimes.
Right.
We were living in that space and it wasn't even reality TV. That's so interesting. To go back about these iconic scenes and moments that we can all call on now, and the backlash that then evolves. I remember our parents watching SNL, and there was a sketch making fun of like how like slutty they were. It was like them at brunch listing all their STDs.
Yes.
I remember even then being like, that seems weird.
That's the part that's annoying. It's
Yeah.
not that you made fun of it. You can go ahead and, I mean, there's
Yeah.
tons to make fun of about, believe me, there's plenty of criticism to go around about the show. If you're doing it and you're like, oh, I don't think you didn't watch it, you don't get it. They're like, not that slutty.
Yes.
Generally, I mean, like,
Yeah.
I would never say anyone's slutty, but you know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
yes.
Like, it's so rare to find a really sex positive thing in media still. The bad stuff that happened to them in bed was
Yeah.
like so critical, and that you could go to brunch or whatever with your friends then.
Yeah.
You didn't even have to admit anything about yourself. You
Yeah.
could just be like, what did you guys think about, you know, the funky spunk guy on
Right.
Sex and the City? And it
Yes.
opened up these conversations among women. And that part to me
Yes.
really, like, it just boils me because
Yeah.
I just get so mad. That is exactly the kind of thing that makes people not want to be open.
And it sends this message that any amount of sex that women are having is excessive.
I remember there was like the stigma of Samantha, like she was crazy, she was campy. And now as time has gone on, she's kind of an icon. And it's interesting, she's the one missing from the reboot, actually.
I know. And I mean, this has been the debate about the reboot to some extent, is just like, can you really do it
Yeah.
without her? She is the Sex and the City is a thing people say a lot. So that to me, I can understand. And I also am really excited about the idea of these women at that age being on television and
Yeah.
still maintaining some level of like, we're going to talk about our sex lives, we're going to talk about relationships, because we tend to see women who are either 30 or like 70. We have
Yes.
like Grace and Frankie, which we could even use more of those.
Yes.
But like, there is a lot in between that, and also a lot of really dramatic stuff happens to you in your like 40s and 50s, and we almost never see it
Yeah.
on television.
It's like a way of like measuring how media has evolved and culture has evolved, to see how they deal with it now, how they answer for certain
So
things.
that's a really
Yeah.
good way of putting it, because
Yeah.
when people ask me how I feel about the reboot, I actually think this is sort of a cultural high wire act too.
Yes.
Like, because so much has changed, and not just with women on television and sex, but also the Black Lives Matter movement,
Yes.
the fact that we're so much more aware of like wealth disparity.
Yeah.
It's not a super glamorous time.
Yeah.
When they announced this last year, when we were still like hardcore in a pandemic and like out at marches, I was like,
Yes.
okay, we'll see how that goes. But I've heard of the writing staff, I've heard of some of the casting choices they've made already
Yeah.
that sound promising. You know, it shows the power of having diversity on your staff. It makes a huge difference. The show straddled a time when we were really just starting to talk about this. You can actually show the relationship between different changes in technology and shifts in how diversity on television is. In the 70s and even 80s with like the Cosby wave, network television was way more diverse than the 90s and the 2000s, and it's because of what cable did. Because you could actually have whole cable channels that were essentially just like, that's for Black people. Everything else was deemed for white people, and it somehow excused like network television and even
Wow.
an HBO from addressing it at all. You know, it was this very segregated time, but we were also starting to talk about it. So we were also starting to be aware on shows like Friends and shows like Sex and the City. So
Yeah.
both of those have examples of very clumsy attempts. Sex and the City has the problem too of being one of those shows that's trying to be edgy. Shows that are trying to be edgy, especially in the 2000s, to our modern eyes, are some of the most offensive things. Friends is this way too. I rewatched Friends recently,
Yeah.
and like the homophobia.
Totally. There were so many gay jokes.
Sex and the City has these moments, right?
Yeah.
Like the episode when Samantha dates Black Man.
Yes.
And they just throw every Black cliche
Yes.
into the whole mix. And the only physical fight between two women on that entire show is between Samantha and his sister. Kind of in the ironic racism
Yeah.
category, right? Of like they make a joke about his size and then
Yes.
kind of lampshade it and be like, oh, but we don't say that. You know, it's just
Right.
like, no, but you just said it on your show that
Right.
everyone watched. Like,
Yes.
you can't just do that and then make a joke about the fact that you did it. It was one of the first like all female. I mean, they had male showrunners, but they had all women writing for it, and they literally would go out at night, experience things, come in the morning, talk about it and
Oh my
put it in
gosh.
shows.
That sounds like a fun process.
A van would come pick them all up in the morning. They ended up like having this time, all the writers, and it was all women, all in their 30s. Get into the van, talk about like, did anything happen to you last night? They'd all talk about their dates, whatever. Get to the studio, then they'd be there with Michael Patrick King, who is the showrunner, and then they'd kind of like give him the highlights from what they just talked about in the van. And then anything from that they wanted, they'd put up on the whiteboard, and then they'd start like the real writing day.
When we were talking earlier just about the fact that we haven't seen women having conversations on TV really until this show, it makes me think of like consciousness raising communities that would happen in the 60s and 70s.
When you were watching Sex and the City, if you felt like, gosh, this is just like having a conversation with my girlfriends, that's because it actually was in a weird meta way. And then it would go out into the world, and then that would allow women to then take it back to their own brunches and be like, what did you think about this? And then they'd have their own conversations with their friends. To me, the biggest thing about Sex and the City is the importance of women telling their own stories, going all the way back to Candace Bushnell and the fact that she had a column called Sex and the City, then she had a book based on that column, and then that became the show, and then that became this conversation, and employed these women writers on the show. So it had this giant effect. We can tell when it's a man telling us what we think women's stories are versus when it actually is. There definitely are parts of that are not great. Is it okay that they were super materialistic? But I do think that them being so heightened made being a single woman look appealing in a way that, this is another one you cannot believe at the time because it came such a stereotype from Sex and the City of like shoes and single ladies out on the town. But that didn't exist before. Like our idea of a single woman before this, kind of that sad, I sit at home on Saturday night and love brownies.
Right.
So for them to come out and be like, no, we're in our 30s. We are professional grown-ass women who have our own lives, and we look hot as hell doing it, and we are not concerned about the fact that we don't have men. That's why they were so threatening to men. Part of their whole shtick had to be that they had their own money to the point where they could provide this glamorous life for themselves instead of they were not gold diggers. And that was a really key thing, especially with somebody like Big. It could have been depicted very differently.
And I think we do see this with the Kardashians as well. There's a dismissal and even a disregard or disgust for them because it's a bunch of women trying to be independent and doing stuff.
The wealth of both of these groups of women is important because that is how they are able to be independent.
Yes, women are not supposed to have economic power.
Right. Male reviewers watching the show were just like, did not know what to do because it wasn't for them. They were so flummoxed and like really hated. There were some conversations in the early episodes about like, she compares a man she's been with to a gherkin. This just sent them. They could not get off the gherkin. The one line that was sort of about them and it was insulting and it was so upsetting, especially in the first season, the way that they would like blatantly objectify men is so kind of fun to watch.
Totally. See, as a lesbian, I think that is so entertaining to watch. I love watching straight girls objectify men. I don't know why, and I haven't quite figured out why it amuses me, but
I think it's just because we don't see it.
I love to see it.
There's something very satisfying. This is such a media studies thing, but there's something weirdly satisfying when you just see something you've never seen and you suddenly realize like, why do I never see this?
Yeah, it reframes it.
When women objectify men, it's fun to you because it's fun in general. We don't do it violently. It's always celebratory. It's always just fun. Like, look at him. Da, da, da. It's we never have the impulse to violently objectify men.
You're not going to violate them. We're just like, he has great abs. If men could objectify women the way that women objectify men, might we enjoy it a little? It's more admiration, right? It's just more like, my God, your hair's so beautiful.
It's like
and
an
you have great
artful,
abs.
wow.
When men are like, what's the big deal about it? Like, I'm just saying you're pretty. It's like, but you aren't.
And it's like centuries of violence.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I don't like it.
It's a power thing, right? The entire show, I don't think there's any male gaze, straight cis male gaze in this. That like, because it's so high fashion, what Patricia Field is doing, she is not interested in what looks sexy on women to men. Sometimes they looked sexy, but she never dressed them in a way that implied that they were doing it at all for the men. So that
it's about expression. Okay, so let's talk about like more similarities we see between these two groups of strong women.
I mean, it's so funny because I hadn't thought of it at all until I was talking to you. And then suddenly I was like, oh my God, because it's like the Kardashians, it feels like it grows right out of it.
Yes.
An independent group of women that's really just women.
Yeah.
You know, doing their thing and helping each other and having the different types and groups of like 4 and 5 and 6.
People like ensembles.
Where you can be like, oh, I'm the Chloe or I'm the Samantha. There's a look to the show and to them. The influence on like fashion and beauty, especially for I think the Kardashians even more. Like, Sex and the City women, particularly Sarah Jessica Parker, kind of has become an influencer. I don't know which came first. Like it might be that the Kardashians kind of pioneered that and then she jumped on realizing that she had the elements that she had developed during Sex and the City. So she has a line of shoes and she's had other brand extensions as well. And I think it's very similar. I really feel like the Kardashians pioneered this and made it so that all the other female celebrities know what to do now, if that makes sense.
Carrie herself as a character was almost the
Such a
original
good point.
influencer.
I suspect they may work this into the reboot. At a minimum, my understanding is that Carrie has a podcast. Carrie would have had to shift her media empire. She's not gonna be a newspaper column.
Like no.
With women like this who were coming up in a different era and are now entering, you know, having a show on the air currently, can use a lot of those tools. And they did a lot of this. They did a lot of like messing with the media early. For instance, they were like, none of the men were signed at first. And so everybody publicly was like, no, I don't know, maybe Big's probably not in it. Yeah. And then they did sign them and we did all hear about it. But it's like they've almost like made a narrative of lead up in addition to whatever is going to happen.
Sex and the City and Keeping Up with the Kardashians and Sex and the City paved the way for this, of not only the advertising on the show of physical locations, because Keeping Up with the Kardashians did that a lot, especially early in the show. They would like go to places and you could see where it was. Yeah. And then they started doing it in more subtle ways as the show went on, but Sex and the City did that without even realizing it at first with New York, and then it probably started reinforcing the demand for it. Yeah.
And I wonder if there is an influence of Sex and the City on seeing these ladies cover the, be all over the town.
Completely.
And wanting to mimic that.
And I think the Kardashians probably took, I don't want to say like consciously, I don't think they like looked at Sex and the City and they were like, how can we monetize this better? But that idea out there of like, people really do want to do the stuff that they see their favorite people on TV doing. Right. And then they took this to the new level. And now the women of Sex and the City are like taking that back for themselves. Yes. You didn't see it right away. You didn't see her having a shoe line, right afterwards. And I think there was almost a resistance. I'm not sure of this, but I can imagine there being a little bit of like, no, I need to move on from that, or I'm an actress, I'm not Carrie Bradshaw. And then eventually you both come to terms with that and also see what these women are doing. It's like, I am the shoe woman. That's such a smart, clear, basic idea for her.
They mastered it in a way the Kardashians did, where it did, at first it was really gritty and like almost embarrassing, the stuff they would do, but then they mastered that like shameless plugging and shameless business creation in a way that's now like chic and like understandable and like smart, and people respect it more now, and it's like less cheapened, and they're like, so now a Sarah Jessica Parker who's like a respected individual can go make a shoe line without being like, oh, she went and made her shoe line.
That's so true. And you're even making me think about something I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is I'm seeing a lot more people who have been on iconic shows embracing the fact that their characters from those. There used to be a period when people were supposed to be like, no. And now they're just all embracing it. I think this is a new extension of the Kardashian influence of just like, own it, monetize the place you have in the marketplace, give the people what they want.
You know who does this really well? Kyle MacLachlan.
And maybe it's because there's so many more ways to also exploit this. The internet has opened up the fact that you can have a podcast or a web series or even just an Instagram feed that is about, if somebody else is going to have an Instagram feed about your iconic thing.
Yes.
Why shouldn't you have that?
That is so true. You take the narrative back just like the Kardashians do. And I think they've modeled that you can both be identified with something that you're really known for and that's beneficial to you, but you can also transcend it. So fan accounts happen, as maybe it's helping people reclaim their thing and be like, I'll celebrate myself if you're going to celebrate me. Let's talk about the economy of fandom.
So the Sex and the City people in particular are very distinct. One of my favorite podcasts is the Bradshaw Boys. It's a couple of straight, cis men watching Sex and the City for the first time. Carrie Bradshaw, another of my favorites. dressing up in all of Carrie's iconic looks and recreating scenes from
That's
the show.
awesome.
Like sometimes even things you don't think were that big a deal have these whole little fan economies around them.
I think it's probably been really facilitated by social media. Creative minds are able to consume this media actively and then disseminate it in their own way with their following.
And it's something we never used to be able to experience, 20 or 30 years ago. Like maybe somebody would be off making fan art in the corner by themselves, but we would never hear about it. But this is like anyone can do anything they want with the work that's out there, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of something that is embarrassing for us, but like cute. When we were little-ish, like middle school, maybe like high school, we made a poster board for no reason that compared Sex and the City and Entourage and drew all the parallels between them and presented it to our parents.
Amazing.
I have zero recollection of it.
There's a picture of us next to it.
It'd be a really weird thing for you to make up, so I will say that much. Each of these kinds of iconic things, though, and I'm sure the Kardashians have the same thing, have little fiefdoms of like, I call them professional fans, people who have taken their fandom to such a degree. It often is not their main profession, but it's like a very vital side thing. Even with Sex and the City, one of the most famous things about it, and I just said this recently, I think I'm right about this, I think they have the most famous bus tour.
Oh, that makes
I can't
sense.
think of any other bus tour that's iconic.
That might be a good special feature for this episode.
Yeah.
Going on the bus tour.
Have like the worst vibes ever. Have the worst vibes. Wow. Hey, we are getting Starbucks really quick, like a block away.
Okay, we're trying to find it. We got here a little bit early and I'm really grateful about that.
Amazing.
Okay, Lee's in a bad mood. She doesn't even want to be doing this.
Kevin's not in a good mood either. I'm not lying. You are very clearly in a bad mood.
I'm trying to figure out where this thing is.
All right, cool.
Bye.
Hey, is it this red bus?
No, don't get on the bus. Hurry, just get into
Wait,
the bus.
oh, I see you. Hey, sorry everyone.
Oh, we're going to be filming for a web series.
Wonderful. Woo!
Carrie gives a poem, and Mr. Big takes a poem in the middle of the poem, and she starts to cry, and people think, oh, she's really.
So wait, is this a walking tour? I don't know. I don't know. So do you?
Behind this UPS truck.
Does anyone want edibles?
I can't because I want to interview people.
Do you want edibles?
I'm good.
Wow, so I'm the only one who just took 2 edibles. It's like when you tell people to go get in the pool, and then everyone ends up not jumping. I wouldn't get in the pool either. Well, that ship has sailed for me. This is the Sex and the City mobile.
This is our lovely driver, Amit. Let's give him a nice warm welcome. This is where Trey proposes. Oh, and Donald Trump folks. Oh, just kidding. So I've had moms introduce their daughters to Sex and the City and vice versa. So thank you folks for taking this tour. We're gonna have lots of fun here today.
And they wanted specifically an actor and a singer in the city. And so I submitted and I had the little note and I said, I consider myself a Carrie Samantha and I'm Team Aiden all the way.
Where's my Mirandas? Where's my Mirandas in the house? And no Mirandas?
This is Miranda.
I love Miranda. Where's my Charlottes in the house? Any Charlottes?
Charlotte!
Look at the swaddled dog.
Oh,
That dog's being swaddled.
There's actually a shortage of dogs in the city right now. We'll be getting off very soon at the Pleasure Chest, folks.
Oh my god.
And we've even had moms bring their daughters and buy their daughters a vibrator because they want to be like, you need to know you don't need to go to a person for this.
Oh, that's nice.
That's why I love this show. It brought a lot of things out of the taboo.
And I'm just gonna pop in the store before we all go in and make sure they're not at max capacity. But I'll
In a
make
good
sure
way.
we all.
Oh, they're playing Sex and the City music. Baby, let's rapid fire find what we need. Oh, baby.
So experiential.
Yes.
It's like taking it from the two-dimensional screen to life.
Yes.
It's like a cool tour of the city.
I know it is. It's nice.
I believe the city's extra loud today.
I know.
Who else is teammate? And do I got any other teammates in the house? No one else?
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, I like Aiden. So the fans were really afraid when him and Carrie first broke up that they were gonna write him off. So they sent in thousands of little wooden chairs to HBO Studios with a note that said, "Don't let Aiden go unfinished." And that's how we see on the show.
What are your thoughts on Sex and the City?
Never watched them.
There's gonna be a lot of Sex and the City ladies.
When they finally go home and his parents walk in.
Where are you visiting from?
From Los Angeles.
What made you want to do the tour? I'm just curious.
Big fan.
Yeah?
Yeah. I've rewatched the seasons I don't know how many times.
Which one are you?
She likes to compare me to Big all the time. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad.
Which Sex and the City character are you?
A mix of Carrie and Charlotte.
Isn't it funny that we just know our answers?
Carrie/Miranda.
Do you ever watch the Kardashians?
No.
Why not?
I don't like them.
What don't you like about them?
I think they're boring.
Do you watch the Kardashians ever?
Not really, not so much.
What makes you guys not keep up? I'm just curious.
It's just the same thing over and over, and I don't think they're that interesting, not to be mean.
Which Kardashian are you?
Which Kardashian?
I'll be Kendall.
I would want to be Chloe then.
Why would you want to be Chloe?
Because she's funny.
Yeah.
And she's sweet, it seems.
And then why do you want to be Kendall?
She's just fun, goes with the flow, doesn't really care about judgment.
Yeah.
I think that's how I am too. I just get up and do what I gotta do.
Probably Kris Jenner. I like to boss people around.
Yeah, totally.
She is a genius. She turns a bad situation into a profit.
Yeah,
literally.
Do you like the way Sex and the City depicts New York? Does it make you intrigued with New York?
Yeah, I feel like I've been in New York, so it's just really cool.
Through Sex and the City, we kind of understood what New York was about
Yeah.
and the perspective, and then seeing it right now, it makes sense. It's pretty cool to see. Yeah.
I love that you're not a boyfriend who's kind of I don't like Sex and the City. That's cool.
Yeah, very comfortable with my sexuality and my thoughts of the filming.
Oh, very cool.
We're not filming anything with actors right now. But unfortunately, we cannot go to Carrie's stoop right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I love the little mini bites. Life is perfect.
If you had to guess, which Kardashian is which Sex and the City character?
The only one I would pay attention to is Courtney. Probably Carrie.
Carrie is Kim.
Oh, Courtney and Chloe are both Miranda Samanthas. I feel like Kendall is Charlotte because she's the most drama-free.
Charlotte would be Kim, and then Miranda would be Courtney.
Oh, interesting. Courtney was Miranda, now she's Charlotte.
Yeah, something like that because
I think you're right.
at first she balances her the life with her kids and the complications she had with her couple, and now she's living the life.
Yes. It's all about love again.
So the fans were also really worried that Mr. Big was going to get written off the show. So they sent him thousands of red balloons with notes that said, "Don't let Mr. Big fly away."
Wait, so they all the fans just knew to do that?
They all knew to do. If you think about this,
how did the fans coordinate the tiny chairs?
by emails, and I think just word of mouth.
They made their voices heard.
They made their voices heard.
And then they came back and were like, okay, the thing we did with the chairs, we're now going to do with the balloons.
It worked.
Raise your hand if you want a Cosmo. Who wants a Cosmo? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Oh.
We're interviewing people because we're on the Sex and the City tour and we wanted to ask people their opinions about Sex and the City.
Oh my God.
Do you like it?
Come here. This family is here for Sex in the City.
Really? Is it cool if we... Hi! We just found out you guys are here for Sex in the City. Are we? Who was your favorite character and who was her favorite character?
Both same.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Was he just really drunk?
I think so. It's been interesting to me that a lot of people on the tour aren't Kardashian fans.
Everyone's been they're boring. There's sort of a stigma, there's kind of a I don't like them that we've seen, but it's kind of but it's a natural extension of the culture of Sex and the City. Mm-hmm. So it's are you guys having fun?
Yeah.
Are you guys having fun?
Yeah.
This is the ultimate dream right here.
Really?
Oh yeah, to be a scout with the Cosmo.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so do you guys like Sex and the City?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite character?
Sarah Jessica Parker, obviously. I don't even want Sex and the City. I just think that they're sexy bitches. That's all I know.
What about the Kardashians? Do you like them?
I love them. I think they're such good role models. I know people say they're not, but I think they're marketing geniuses. They know what they're doing with every single thing they do, and they're just so smart. Kris Jenner is a fucking genius.
Who's your favorite Kardashian?
She's a bad bitch.
What's your moment where you're when you think about Sex and the City? I feel like everyone has a scene.
Yes, I honestly love when Charlotte says, well, why can't we all be each other's soulmates? That's one of my favorite moments in the show because it's so true. It's hard being a single lady in New York City, especially if you don't have friends are family in here, and your friends do become your chosen family.
Is there a Kardashian moment that comes to mind when you're like, oh, that's like a classic Kardashian situation?
When Kim left Kanye, that was pretty iconic, and just the fact that she could walk away from such a powerful position. Only the Kardashians could do that, and then keep her fame, keep the media on them. I mean, Kris Jenner's pulling the strings for them. I'm sorry, I've had a lot to drink tonight. And
you sound great. You sound great.
Nice to meet you. My name's Timmy.
Open some salads.
Oh yeah, oh right, I forgot. I'm hungry too. Yeah, this always happens at the
Well, you
end.
don't want to really be eating it the whole time.
It's hard to eat salads too. I mean, what we're doing is very bold. We're in the lightning round now. Have you ever experienced a glitch in the simulation?
God, like the whole last year and a half. Yeah, my sister and I actually have a joke going now that like we're either dead or we're in the Matrix, and so we're constantly texting each other evidence that we're like maybe died in the 2000s and like all the pop culture that's just regurgitating now.
Oh my God, yeah.
That maybe we died in like 2004 or 5 or 6 or 7. Britney having a revival and Paris Hilton,
Yeah.
you know, coming back and like every reboot, all of that stuff. Where it's like all stuff that could just be us, you know, projections of our part of the Matrix.
I love picturing sisters processing the simulation because that's what these sisters
That's right.
do.
Yes.
And then somehow the way Kim Kardashian fits into that as like the driver of like the glitch and
That's
like
right.
guiding us through
I think
it.
it's actually just her.
Yeah.
She's the whole thing.
She's
like,
the glitch.
At the end, we're just going to see that she's been operating the machinery the whole time.
Mm-hmm. What is your personal brand?
I mean, I think I actually had to work this out once to do my website design, among other things. And the tagline is writing for the pop culture literate. So I'm going to go with that. That's sort of the idea is making people feel smart about what they're enjoying. And I don't believe in guilty pleasures. There's a reason we're attracted to something. Let's see why. Pop culture is everything, is like what we surround ourselves with. It's what we choose. It's a reflection of us. And I think it's crazy that we spent, you know, it's different now, but like I feel like we spent so many decades kind of pretending like it wasn't important. And it's crazy because it's like one of the biggest parts of our lives.
Yes, absolutely. Which Kardashian are you?
I think I'm Kim. Somehow that just clearly came to me.
Thank you so much for being here. I had so much fun with you.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.